Hey, welcome back to the Cloud Gurus. I know we took a little bit of an extended break for the holiday week, but I'm back. Will, I know you're back. How's it going?
Good. How was your holiday?
Uneventful for the most part. I mean, my brother came to town. We had a bit of a cookout. That was kind of about it. How about you?
It was good. I've had a lot of family in and out of town, Mike. I just had my first child, and we're going on month.
Congratulations again, obviously.
Thanks. We're going on month 2, and the sleep has been minimal, but there's been this revolving door of family in and out, and so I don't even remember who was in town that weekend. But we've had a lot of people in and out, and I made the decision to go buy a grill, which, I mean, it's perfect timing, right? Like, summer's here, 3-day weekend, tons of family out. And I don't think there has been more than 3 days that have passed that I've not used that grill. I'm like, I don't know why it took me so. We just bought our house in January. 6 months have gone past of opportunities lost.
I was going to say, I can't believe it took you that. What kind did you get? Gas or charcoal?
So we have a natural gas hookup to our house, which is killer. And so it was pretty easy to do natural gas. And the cool thing about natural gas, I don't know how deep we're going to get here, but there's an even...
Well, this is a natural gas podcast, so...
Right. It's this even distribution of heat, which I love. I'm so used to, propane, and that's can be a little wonky depending on the pressure and all that. But we got a Weber. I say it totally was my decision. We were between a couple different options, and I was like, I'm just going to get a big Weber. And it is I do not regret spending a little bit more on it at all, because it is a beast. And it's one of those things where it doesn't have all these bells and whistles. It just does what it needs to do really, really well. Happy days. I mean, we made a couple steaks last night. It's been great.
I'd believe it. I mean, I completely understand what you're saying too. With once you get it, you're just using it every single day. So we bought our house back in 2021, and we got it. It was middle of summer. We got a grill a month later, and I think even now I'm still just, as long as the weather's nice, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to use it if I can.
Yeah, and if there's no mess in the kitchen, I mean,
well, that's the best part.
That's exactly. I mean, I can destroy a kitchen with one very simple meal, but when I'm grilling, I just can use the hose, right? Very, very easy. So yeah, that's what I did. And, took a few extra days off. It's been good. And, I know we've had a lot of things happening actually at CloudBolt as well. So
we have, I wanted to speak to some of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll start by saying we had an amazing customer event a few weeks back. And for those of you who are listening, who were there, thank you again for coming out. It was really a tremendous opportunity, and especially, coming out of COVID and not so many opportunities to be with your customers and with your peers and counterparts. It's great to have everybody in the same room, just in general, to have some sort of human element and get away from the screens that rule our lives. But beyond all that, it was at the Porsche Center in Atlanta. Really great experience. I got to, Mike, I'm sure you'll be jealous about this, but I got to go 110
jealous
miles
for 3 weeks.
Yep, 110 miles per hour in a 911. I was not driving, or else, there would have been some insurance implications. But yeah, it was really, really cool experience. And then I think probably most valuable outside of just sitting in a really fast car was hearing directly from our customers about, their thoughts on 2023 and the market trends and what they're facing in their business. And a lot of the folks that we had out were, are IT leaders for their business in some capacity. And we, having
the people you want to hear directly from.
Yeah, absolutely. And having our senior leadership there, and our sales leadership, and then obviously marketing leadership and product leadership, there were so many moments where we just needed to capture that was a great, great tidbit or great problem set or great even validation, some of the things that we're developing towards and engineering towards. Obviously, I'm very close to our product teams. And so there was some validation, but there was also some really good examples of, oh, I don't think we've thought about that problem set in this way, or what, maybe on the ground some of our customers are needing. And so, very exciting to have those moments. We're going through kind of an exercise now where we're disseminating all of what we learned and what we heard and making sure the right functional areas kind of have everything we need to take it forward. So, if you weren't there and you're a customer or potentially a prospect, hopefully you're going to be seeing very quickly a lot of reaction to those pieces of feedback. And I think it was one of those moments where we got to do a lot more of this because it was just a fun time, and a very insightful time.
And we've had some exciting conversations, I think, since that event took place. And I don't know how specific you're able to get, but I'm wondering, was there anything really surprising that you heard, while you were talking with some of these IT leaders or various customer representatives? Like anything that just sort of was unexpected, good or bad?
Yeah, I don't know about unexpected. I would say validation of even just what we're talking about today, and we've been talking about so far in this series around kind of this renewed focus on efficiency in the business. And yeah, I've kind of talked about my thesis. It was very much validated in the customer event, and in even things like FinOps, which I know we're not focusing on just yet. Just another round of people saying this is front and center, absolutely a directive. And there's companies with, large logos that household names that everybody would know, where we're hearing this is a top 5 initiative for the CEO is FinOps. And we're talking multi-billion-dollar companies. That's, to me, I've been in FinOps for years. I've never seen that height in focus. So, anything, I guess that you could call that surprising. You absolutely could call that surprising. You could also call it validating. And even just reactions to some of our roadmap and where we're headed and inputs. Nothing shocking, but to be able to present, this is where we're going to be in 90 days. This is where we hope to be in a year. And here's what we're thinking beyond. And to have direct feedback in a group setting, like not just from one customer to us, kind of customers bouncing off each other.
Have that discussion. Everyone can sort of have their input.
Right. And a lot of customers, I think, left going, I need to continually not just work with CloudBolt, but work with these other people that are in their room that have all these use cases that I could benefit from, but I'm not necessarily doing that today. And so that community approach, I'd say that was another big takeaway is, how do we, enable, we've got all these channels. How do we enable our community to kind of work with each other? Because our platforms and our technology is really flexible. And so a lot of times customers will come to us and ask us for the answer, and we a lot of times will have it, but then we don't have, the collective knowledge of the hundreds of thousands of users that we have using our platforms. And so how do we better connect all these people together? It's certainly something I know our customer success team is working to renew. It's not that we haven't been doing it, but renew it in a tangible way so that we don't lose that type of constructive conversation. So anyways,
it's critical. I was going to say to that point, I know every once in a while we do have enablement on offsites for our customers. So I guess for the customers that are listening, when is our next sort of enablement offsite, our next CMP boot camp?
Yeah, we have a boot camp next week. So it's kind of short notice. I believe that's in Atlanta. I might be mistaken, but if you're interested, I'm sure we still have spots. If you're a prospect or a customer or something along those lines listening, you absolutely reach out to your customer success manager or even just your account executive, and I'm sure we can sort that out. And then, really the focus there is going to be just continually bringing these to different regions and things along those lines. We know that businesses are constantly having users in and out and new people hired and new use cases that they want to do. And that's why we want to make sure we've kind of got the roadshow enablement style boot camps.
Excellent. And then one last little bit of housekeeping, and before we get into our continuing discussion currently on, platform engineering principles. You mentioned that FinOps is sort of one of those key priorities, not just with, the IT team, but it's really been bubbled up to the CEO level. So I know that's a thing that we're going to talk about, not just on this podcast in the near future. It's going to come up. We already have stuff on our website. We're going to talk about it more on our blog. But you, I believe, will actually be at FinOps X in San Diego at the end of this month. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on there and sort of what you're going to be talking about while you're on the floor.
Yeah, well, those listening who don't know, we are a partner with the FinOps Foundation, and we have been for a while here at CloudBolt. And so, we're pretty active in that community. But absolutely, FinOps X this is the second year that the FinOps Foundation is putting this on, and it really is a few days of subject matter experts coming together and talking about not only kind of where FinOps is at, but collectively learning from use cases in other organizations and understanding what's next. I think at this point we kind of know everybody's at different stages in their journey for FinOps, from just now starting off all the way up to we've been doing this for years, and it's a good expo or conference to just be focused on that. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of practitioners in the FinOps space there, a lot of IT leaders, a lot of vendors and partners and things along those lines. We're going to be there. We definitely have a presence. We have a booth. Yeah, I'd ask if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out. I think we've got a landing page on our website where you can sign up to have a meeting with us. If you'd like to just talk to us and set aside some time, we can do that.
Have the show notes.
Yeah, definitely put that in the show notes. And then, we're going to have our product experts there, like our product leads. I'll be there, obviously, and a few others just talking about where we are now, what our capabilities are, where we're going, and other things. We've got a really cool new piece of feedback that's coming out, the real state of FinOps, that looks at, it surveys a whole bunch of IT leaders and practitioners in the FinOps space, as well as just end engineers and end users in the business. And it talks about this dynamic between, what is leadership's confidence in FinOps and what are people on the ground floor feeling and seeing from their business, and how has that changed very recently. And so there's a lot of insights that we'll be sharing. It's not released yet, but it'll be released around the time that we go to FinOps X. So we'll have that available for people to come see. So even if it's not coming over and chatting with us about the products, definitely come over and take a look at that research, and we'll be handing that out.
Great. And maybe this is a teaser, maybe it's not. I would love to talk with you about that once the research is out and once you've been able to sort of get some feedback at FinOps X as well as a few other places. I think this would be a great place to sort of talk about our thoughts on the findings from the research and just sort of what that means for the future of FinOps and the future of just cloud technology in general.
Yep, absolutely. We're going to have a webinar, I believe, on that. So look out. I don't think we have a date planned, but early July, and we will absolutely bring some of that to this discussion here.
Yeah, no, as soon as we know when that is, we'll start putting that out there and make it easy to sign up. So without further ado, I think we can pivot really to the main thing that I wanted to discuss this week. I know you wanted to discuss it as well because you had such a great conversation with Jason Reinhardt 2 weeks ago, trying to understand like what it means to be sort of a platform architect in the modern era. And just really, I'm almost a stroke of luck. Gartner put out a really, really interesting piece of content where they sort of detailed, to read the exact title of it, right? How to leverage platform engineering principles to deliver infrastructure platforms. To maybe simplify that, just how should you be designing your platforms for ease of use internally, externally, things that I don't know about you, but I have always felt has been for a lot of engineering teams, if not second tier priority, not necessarily the only or the main priority. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'll throw out, so Dennis Smith is the analyst that wrote this, and we engage with Dennis all the time. We've met with him quite a few times, and he knows a tremendous amount about I&O, and it's very like this was published June 1st, so last week. And as I think about the arc of this series, it's we've talked about kind of the problem, which is this complexity between clouds and technology stacks, and how businesses are looking to be very efficient in 2023 and increase their overall efficiency across technology, people, and process. And we wanted to start this series talking about the people element, of course, because as I've stated a bunch of times, that is, to me, that's where you need to be thinking first and foremost. I've kind of got this mantra around technology doesn't solve technology on its own. And so talking about the people element is huge. In this article coming out, I think is a good place for us to kind of review, because it does, I would say, kind of underpins a lot of what we're talking about in this series, and certainly a lot of the dialogue we had with Jason last week around his role and the trends he's seeing in the market. And to your point, Mike, like the increased, I would say, strategic value of a platform engineer. In the past, it's been a role that had a certain function or scope, and it was a little bit minimal, unless it was at kind of a larger GSI or an MSP where it needed to be kind of a strategic leadership level position. Most enterprises have had platform engineers just kind of in pockets of their business, and they only had so much control. What we're seeing in this article kind of alludes to is an elevation of that type of framework and those roles in the business, because I think it's needed at a higher scale. So it was a very cool article, and certainly lots to discuss.
I'm curious too, before we dive sort of into what the article discusses and sort of our thoughts on it. Do you think maybe it really is just the increasing complexity that you've mentioned, the article mentions as well, but like, why do you think it is that we're talking about this? Gartner's talking about this. We're not the only ones. Why this is becoming an increasingly important topic? Why design principles are starting to be brought to platform engineering in a way it really hasn't been ever, I would say.
Yeah, well, and the timeline's important because when you think about, let's just say, the last 5 to 10 years, the adoption of SaaS and cloud was happening by, I think about the technology adoption curve, by a lot of what I would call competitive and early adopter, kind of forward-thinking enterprises and companies. Through the pressures of COVID-19, it was a forced adoption of these things, right? And what I mean by that is truly your on-prem infrastructure could not, in most cases, handle all of your employees working from home,
right,
and your customers now being across the globe. Okay. So that happened so quickly. I mean, as we all remember, I hate to go flashback to that moment, but like within 3 months, companies had 0 people in offices. And you think about what it would take to have the infrastructure stood up on premise to support that. Or even if you're like a company like an Amazon, who I know has built their own internal apps, first and foremost, IBM, very similar. I don't want to go purchase Teams licenses from Microsoft. I want to have my own virtual, video software for communicating. Going from, we kind of need this here and there, to now we need it to run the organization writ large.
It's an entirely different approach.
You need so much so quickly to be an underpin of that. Let's also not forget that there was a huge shortage in the actual hardware, and that came through manufacturing problems in, a bunch of countries that were leading the actual, let's just call it nuts and bolts of what is required to stand up a data center. At the same time, you've got hyperscalers who have much more purchasing power and economies of scale, so they can really hold the manufacturers of these nuts and bolts. They can hold them to the fire and get a really good rate and get expedited. Like if Microsoft's standing up a new data center, I'm sure they're taking priority over just your company doing it. And so this lack of, availability and resources, that was another, I would say, factor. And so what happens all at once is, and I know this is long-winded, but like you've got just all these people pushing the cloud because you just have to. You can't get the parts. You're all of a sudden you're trying to run an entire company who's working from home. This becomes a huge problem, but now that's starting to scale back, right? I believe in the past couple of weeks, publicly, COVID-19 is no longer an emergency. I think it's one of those things where the health organization has kind of brought it down in scale. And it's been a while since I would say any of us considered it a real threat. But like, as people are going back to office, as people are going back, and think of all of the stock boosts that happened, and all these companies were making a lot of profit through COVID. And you
They
saw
exploded.
just, yeah, tons of revenue and expendable cash. So it wasn't really a problem for a lot of industries to be spending a lot of money on technology. And that's changed very quickly. I mean, you look at the layoffs at a lot of companies. I don't think there's a single industry that hasn't had significant layoffs in the past 6 to 12 months. So there's a people efficiency moment right now where companies are looking at, do we need these resources, and are trimming back, unfortunately. In the same way, you're seeing a reaction to what Jason Reinhart called the technical glutton, which is, okay, we had to do this really quickly with very little like cohesive strategy in a lot of ways. We had to just jump into the cloud, adopt SaaS solutions, and react because we needed to for all these reasons we just discussed. But now we're kind of looking at all the cards on the table and going, how do we take these cards and make them into a playing hand? And understanding that, I think I mentioned it to Jason, it's no longer just a license that you purchase that's sitting on a shelf and collecting dust. It is well and truly actively costing you money in a lot of cases. So super long-winded answer, Mike, but that's what's happening
That's
right
complicated.
now. Yeah, that's what's happening right now is like people adopted very quickly for all those reasons. And they're reacting to, whoa, okay, do we need all this? And it's not just cloud, you know, it's certainly
and not even like, do we need all this? Like, even if we do, are we using it properly? I think you and I just internally have had conversations like that about some of the tools that we use for our line of work.
Yeah, I mean, efficiency is if you are not an efficient company in any way, you're losing money. And the truth is that no company is fully efficient. I mean, obviously, but
no, but it's a scale, and you want to be obviously on the more efficient side of that scale,
right.
So if I
but
I was gonna say, like, if let's say I'm running one of those companies, or I'm heading up the technology, right? Because that's what our focus is going to be. I'm heading up the IT infrastructure. What does this mean for me, right? If someone's coming to me, maybe I have access to this Gartner piece, or there's similar conversations happening internally, and they're saying, hey, you need to start leveraging, some of these platform engineering principles. What does that mean for me? What is expected of me as that leader in that organization?
yeah, well, and at its core, platform engineering is a set of principles. It's not necessarily a role or a title. It is, but it starts with, really the engineering principles of a platform. And really what, platform engineering is, basically streamlining your, as Gartner calls it, staffing, technology, and process. And it's that triangle we've always heard in tech, the people, process, and technology. As an input to these decisions, it's thinking about, holistically, how do our staffing considerations, our technology considerations, our process considerations, or changes or updates or proposals, or, whatever we're trying to bring on, how does that affect the whole of what we're trying to achieve in this platform? And you can interchange the word platform with fabric, with integrated cloud, with, enterprise tech stack in this case. Okay. Traditionally, platform has been kind of one use case. So you think about, you'd have a platform engineer for, let's just use the example of Salesforce.com or HubSpot. It is a hub, and then there's all these spokes that it connects to. And, Mike, I know we use a ton of different tools that all roads lead back to Salesforce.com. And you've got all these these different technologies and processes and people using these technologies and all these things, but really they all kind of come to this, this platform that is Salesforce.com that has one strategic use case and then offshoots of that use case. And probably even better to say not use case, but business value. Think about that at a larger level and go, what if you took all of the platforms like the Salesforce.coms and all of its integrated, applications and inputs and outputs, and you take that and you connect it to everything else in the business? Now you're getting into a really complex landscape. But that's kind of what Gartner is suggesting here is it's hard to do, but how does everything integrate with everything? And if you start to kind of map that out, think about it, and introduce these platform engineering principles as to like, why are we adding a new app for Salesforce.com? Do we already have the functionality either in the core solution, the core platform, or some of these other connections that we have? What is the value of adding something new? And do we really need that? Just doing it at a much higher level. So not just that one use case, but like across your entire IT landscape.
No, that makes sense. For cloud technology and database technology specifically, what does that look like?
Well, some of the things that I have recommended in the past, and I think we should probably have a couple maybe specific conversations around this, but when you think about the public cloud, the question needs to start to be, when should we be using which cloud and why? And even maybe for how long? And there's a ton of reasons, and certainly a framework you can come up with to better understand when your, let's just call it guiding principle or policy would be to move, or to introduce a workload to the public cloud. But then also, what does that decision framework look like for not putting it in the public cloud? And the same can be said about any other technology decision you make, but having very clear architecture around what questions do we ask, what needs to be proven, and what's the break point. And also, when you compare your public cloud choices, let's say you're using AWS, Azure, and you've got your own private cloud, you should be able to understand fiscally what makes the most sense overall, right? You might have the best deal with AWS for just your basic VMs and SQL instances, but then for PaaS, you may work something out with Azure that makes more sense. And maybe you've got a better reservation strategy in Azure. So for all things new technology you put there, you might want to reserve. And then when you compare that to on-prem, maybe you don't have the technology investments for more modern solutions like Kubernetes or clusters or whatever you want to call it. These are all components you have to understand and have categorically defined for your business, not just for the leaders in the business, but for your business to say, if we're introducing these types of technology and the nature of this is X, then we use Y cloud. And those components change from company to company. There's compliance and regulatory considerations. There's location and geography components. There's what you've worked out and the pricing that you have for these clouds. There's also even operational components. Maybe it costs a little bit more to operate in the public cloud, but the staff you have currently knows more about it. And so operationally, you're paying less, and you have less risk if there's an outage versus an on-prem. A lot of times that's not the case. It's the inverse. But you see what I'm saying, right? Like, what is the implication? It's having that. It's having a really good understanding of the value of each of these at a high level, and building some sort of, what I would call like a decision flow chart around if this, then this.
Interesting. So, the way you're describing it to me right now sounds like there's just a lot of things that the people in charge need to implement, a lot of processes that need to go into place, a lot of things that people need to be paying more attention to than they have been before. Is it really just that ad hoc and that unique to every situation that there is just no one or two right answers here, or are there solutions, or is there just a type of solution out there that you think either makes this easier, makes this possible, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say there are absolutely tools and technologies that make this process easier. And those tools and technologies can connect or interweave all of your tech stack into one experience. Now, certainly you can't do that with the public cloud and the private cloud today. Like, your AWS experience is very different than your Azure experience, of course. And building processes that work for both is very tricky because the front door is different. Now, companies have started to try to solve some of that by introducing like infrastructure as code or Terraform that, and this is really your DevOps practices where, the creation of your infrastructure and the creation of your application happens outside of the endpoint. It's not happening necessarily in Azure or in AWS or on your private cloud. It's happening, in some sort of repo, and it's following it maybe a Git framework or something along those lines. And with Terraform or infrastructure as code, you can certainly start to have more modular infrastructure that can get pushed really to any endpoint. And that's not really what we're talking about, although it's a very important component because, getting kind of abstracted away from the endpoint is very important in this, what I would call this platform engineering mindset. Because, the more anchored you are to a specific solution, then the harder it's going to be to use these other solutions and scale up. But I don't know if that necessarily solves the integration problem,
right?
When you start to factor in the other components of a service. You think about a business service.
It's more than
not just your DevOps teams and your infrastructure teams. It's application teams, security teams, operations teams, and there's all these FinOps teams now. There's all these inputs that these other functions have, and the end result is a package that lives somewhere and has some business value. And the hope is that end package follows the framework that your business has that includes inputs from all of those different functions. Now, if you could, think about like a cloud management platform, like what we offer, that's a very different proposal, because what we can do is we can connect to all of your technologies, and we can connect to your different doors, which is your Azure, your AWS, and your on-prem. And we can even abstract that even further, including the abstraction of your infrastructure as code, but then including all of the inputs from the other parts of the business, your FinOps teams, your SEC teams, you name it. And you can create repeatable services for your business that can be automated, right, in an automated fashion, and uses the logic that you set forth. So, one of the key components of being a platform engineer is ensuring that you are tying together all of your solutions. You've got a decision-making framework that makes sense for the benefits and the outcomes of where things end up. But also, you're being kind of agnostic other than from a business value perspective, and you're making it very easy for consumers. We can't forget that, DevOps teams and teams like that, they're bogged down by service requests so much because they're having to make so many decisions and they're not able to just operate.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, right, it's taking, I don't know how much CMPs, whether it's ours or someone else's, has changed as drastically as somebody who is unfamiliar with it might think over the last few years. But it does sound like as this conversation shifts, and as the platform engineering principles become more important, become more integral to success, the calculus of what a CMP is goes from being, this is a nice to have thing that's going to maybe speed up my time to value a little bit, and it's going to make my life a little bit easier than it is on a day-to-day basis, to, this is going to actually make it possible to not just enact these processes that I'm trying to implement in my organization and in my infrastructure, but automate some of that as well. So maybe it's a little bit more hands-off.
Well, that's right. I mean, you think about having to connect, and I mean, I don't want this to come across as salesy or anything like that, but
No, no.
certainly it is how a lot of our customers are using our platform. It's one approach to solving this problem, which is maybe not for everything that our business delivers, but for the core components of what our business deliver, we're going to kind of come up with a prescriptive approach. And that comes back to what Jason and I were talking about last week, which is this balancing act of choice in the business
Hmm.
and not giving a choice, giving guardrails, giving, a process, a technology that is firm because you know the implications of it not being firm. It might be worth taking a second, Michael. I'm happy to read. Like Gartner really outlines some of, I think, a lot of the principles we're talking about here really well, and their examples, but probably worth just
I agree.
discussing them. So,
As long as Gartner's not going to be upset about it.
well, I mean, luckily we're a pretty good partner with Gartner, but I'll just read a few that stuck out to me. The platform will provide a self-service experience that reduces the cognitive load of users and improves flow while reducing frustration. And so you think about that and you go, okay, well, self-service could mean just self-service for one team, but it goes on to say improves flow and reduces frustration. To me, that spells interconnected self-service that truly has, every part of what needs to happen in some sort of sequence. Sometimes that does mean there's still inputs that need to happen from a human, but anything that doesn't require a human automatically happens, and you get not necessarily a carbon copy, but the same output every time or a similar expected output every time. The platform will provide a paved road, which is aligned with security, architecture, and compliance guidelines that customers will want to use. This notion of paved road, we've talked about, we teased a little bit on this series, but we'll certainly go more into it. It is becoming a standard. We heard it a lot at our customer event. We were hearing it, with our prospects and from analysts and everybody we're talking to, where businesses are starting to say, okay, 80% of the time, the services that we deliver, and by the way, when I say services, I don't mean change my password. What I mean is like, I need a new application or a new instance of an application or a new component to an application, something along those lines. And in the past, the amount of information that you'd have to give to get that same request, the amount of pressure or workload that's put on the initial asker was high. And then what happened is there was so much manual activity that needed to happen. I think we had a quote at our customer event that was like, we used to have a 3-week turnaround time for even the simplest deployment. We can do that in 30 minutes now. And so you think about a paved road, it's what are the instances that don't require custom development or a lot of custom inputs or a lot of thinking outside the box with architecture. These are things we've done day in, day out, week in, week out. We know what it looks like. We know what best looks like. How do we make that as simple as possible? And, with FinOps as a part of the table now, it's even the paved road a lot of times will be, what do we think the budget needs to be before it flags another approval? If Michael Wohl is a director, he should have some sort of budgetary ability to go produce without being stopped up to a certain point. And so the paved road is not just security, architecture, and compliance. It's all these other components. For a security team, it's like a paved road is we do not open our IPs and our ports for certain ports. And if someone's requesting that, block. It's not going to be paid. It's not going to be an easy thing that can be done automatically. So that notion of paved road is something they call out here, and I think it's crucial in the conversation around platform engineering.
And I think too, a lot of that is stuff that can be within a good CMP, right? Can be automated, can be orchestrated. For things that maybe can't be or shouldn't be, how important, I mean, this seems like a dumb question. I think the answer is right there, but how important is visibility, and what are things companies can do to get better visibility?
Yeah, and that's another one of the call outs that Gartner has in this article,
Right.
is, ensuring that the platform is observable and that you can monitor the different components. And for me, it really starts with, do you have your architecture mapped out, and can you kind of segment out the different layers of your tech stack and how they're used in the business, from that front door that the end user or the citizen developer or whomever it is in the business, what they're engaging with, through to the different backbone elements of the platform itself. And a lot of times it's going to be interconnected with a whole bunch of other systems through direct connections or things like APIs and all of that. But starting with some sort of architecture is very important. And then when you have that, having a tool that's got kind of the ongoing discoverability and the ongoing monitoring. Sometimes there's more than one solution you need for that, but having that in a centralized location, I think, is very important, so that all leaders and all users have one stop to look at the platform as a whole, or the individual components, depending on what you're looking to do.
Seems important. So I don't know how much more in depth you wanted to get into this particular subject. I know we want to make sure we have a little meat on the bone for our conversation next week, but was there anything else in this article that really stood out to you that we haven't touched on, or that just maybe needs a second call out?
There's a lot more to discuss on this article itself, and we're actually going to have what I would call a subject matter expert from our side,
Right,
who knows a lot about this, join in a couple weeks. And I think we certainly should bring this back up. I would say for now, it's pretty good tee up to this article. Definitely, if you have access to Gartner's research, go take a look at it. If anything, I consider this kind of advertising for Gartner, because this was a really good article. But for those IT leaders who are looking right now on how they're rethinking the overall platform, the overall integrated landscape that they have, this is a good article to kind of get the gears turning for sure. And the practices that they outline, I would consider them to be evaluation points. Go ask yourself and your leaders, do we have this right now? And are we checking all these boxes? And if not, probably a pretty good place to start.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. I know I read this thing since you sent it over to me. I think I read through it twice. I'm already thinking of ways to implement it into sort of my particular sphere, but it's applicable in a lot of ways. And I'm excited to see, especially as a person who works in marketing, I'm always happy to see things like this become important. Any kind of something similar to a design principle become important to how people approach, in this case, technology and infrastructure. It's just the beginning of a longer conversation, like everything else, and I'm curious and excited to see where it goes. And yeah, I know we're teeing up a conversation that's a few weeks out, but I am looking forward to talking with that expert and really hearing what they have to say, because it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think we can get a little bit more technology driven in that conversation as well, to just not talk conceptually. Let's talk about how this looks in practice from an actual technology perspective. And that should be very insightful, because some of what Gartner gets into here is even things like having a common data tier, a common API tier, a common underlying infrastructure tier, where, again, you're a few levels away from the actual location or endpoint, if you will, and you're starting to kind of bring different worlds together. And that's where you can, once you have a clear understanding of all your technology and you're starting to condense and bring things together, that's where you're going to start to get the most value. So certainly some things to think about, Mike, as we go into that conversation with Rick Kilcoyne, who I think is, who we're teeing up for that conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe he can get some thoughts together. But yeah, it was a good article, and I hope everybody gets an opportunity to read it. If there's any feedback or anything or thoughts as other people read it, there's so much here, but I'd love to hear users' input on kind of what they took away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll put a poll at the bottom of this for anyone who's listening on Spotify, and make a bit of an open forum, right? If there's anything, if you did read this article, or it's just a topic you're thinking about, feel free to let us know your thoughts. Would love to continue this conversation, really grow it, and not just internally, but with everyone who's interested and everyone who's listening. And I think that's a good place to put a pin in this until we bring Rick on to discuss it more in depth. But I'm looking forward to chatting you again on something similar next week.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Chat soon.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye.